What was originally the ending of Kim Possible was a 3-episode length movie for One Last Sitch. Based on Kim's catchphrase, "So not the drama," the movie was called So the Drama to imply something serious was about to go down. One last adventure for the show to go out with a banger. This is peak Kim Possible. With Kim and Ron having been juniors for the last 20 or so episodes, beginning with the movie A Sitch in Time, this chapter of their life should also end with a movie. And so it did not less hesitate to be as tense as Shigo's own little movie. But could this show possibly go out with a better villain than the one it started with? Kim's arch nemesis and fallen friend of her father, the mad scientist of the show, Dr. Drakken. This time he goes all out, and boy, did Mark and Bob not hesitate to show how menacing and manipulative he can be when the show does not make him the butt of a joke. What began as an everyday mission for Kim with her confronting some ninja, including a sumo ninja and Shigo once more, who is on her own order of Drakken in Japan to kidnap video game giant Nakasumi-san to make the story come full circle, promises with each passing minute to give quality in every regard. The movie starts with its own remix of Call Me, Beat Me, this time way more reminiscent of spy and agent movies, and in my opinion the very best version of a theme to have ever existed. This rendition alone shows this time things are different. The show might have come back after So the Drama, but in no way does this fact take away from the movie oozing, "Guys, this is the finale," from every pore. Having taken Nakasumi-san's plane and come back home for a quick bowl of cereal, right in time to depart for school in good old KP fashion, the movie drops its first hints what all of this is about. Kim's father is about to finish a billion-dollar project that he worked on for years. This, paired with Drakken trying out his new synthetic drones and showing some sort of satisfaction and joy for mere concept art that his assistant managed to unknowingly steal, plus him analyzing the common teenage mind, foreshadows what the plot might bring from here on. On top of that, Drakken, similar to Shigo, who opened up a bank in her own movie, plans to take over some big company. Only the first few minutes of the movie have passed at that point, but it is clear that some actual thought has been put into crafting this plot. Cut to Middleton High. What would the show be without including the teenage trouble side? Prom night approaches, and Kim is told by Bonnie any viable option to go there with as a date, apart from some random faceless chess captain, has been picked already. Showtime for Ron Stoppable, who once again is implied to be the kind of person that does not meet societal expectations, and for Kim to harm her own reputation should she go out with him. At that point, this is the 63rd episode full of expectations, pressure and cliches that the teenagers had to endure and fight back against, and one more time for the finale it shall be. This time, however, to make it count. Meanwhile, off-screen, Drakken has already followed through with his plan to take over the big company that will later be revealed to be the Bueno Nacho. And first management changes have also already come to fruition. Only Ron really suffers from those though, as Kim really only has to worry about Bonnie's words, and how much about that might actually be true. But Drakken needs another thing for his plan to work: technology. The show had artificial intelligence, clones, Drakken getting abducted by grey aliens in Area 51, body swaps, getting pulled into the TV dimension, and so much more. So this time another topic with crazy sci-fi potential has to be tackled: Cybertronic technology. While Wade tells Kim and Ron to search for Drakken in a club called the Bermuda Triangle, where Drakken for once has put on a bow tie. And even Shigo slipped into a dress that awoke puberty for those who weren't already in it, our blue-faced lunatic intends to meet Big Daddy, who at that point was only used for the Will Do episode, an episode in the first season, so we get another throwback to the early parts of the show. Drakken, after some issues with the bodyguard and after Shigo having her fun, is allowed to meet the guy and immediately gets scammed by him. Shortly before Shigo can come in, which she probably would not have done anyway as she is busy duking it out with Kim again, Drakken actually gets enough info from Big Daddy to work with. The recent Cybertronic technology results he is out for are ironically concluded from his old friend, Kim's dad. This brings together the seemingly random moment from the beginning of the episode in Kitchen Possible, and ordering Shigo to leave with him, they both leave Kim behind, losing her newest chance to sabotage Drakken's plan. This concludes the first episode. Kim has to deal with the fact that she still has no reputable date, clearly influencing her mood. Ron does not quite get it and only shows interest in bringing back the Nako night. But even then, and especially despite Kim not really thinking about Ron as prom material should she ever not want to be ridiculed, she shows her support by signing his petition. Kim then tries to get her worries out by talking to her father, who outsources it to his wife instead, bringing back the old joke about how he is uncomfortable with whatever shows his daughter growing up, especially dating. This is when Kim shows how, despite Anne's approval of Ron, she considers Ron simply Ron, so her best friend, but not somebody to go to prom with. And be remembered for it. Because she thinks she has to make a statement and Ron is supposedly not the one to make a statement with. Once again, she's overswept by high school drama convincing her that something has to go one specific way if it is supposed to be done right. The next day, Kim seemingly has accepted to not get manipulated by Bonnie and go to prom with Ron. But not for long, as her old friend brings in the newest student. Eric gets introduced. What I suppose is a handsome student, even though I can certainly not say that he's drawn like one. But he immediately goes full-on pickup mode on Kim, and it works, so apparently he must look good enough for a 17-year-old girl, and be charming enough for her to fall in love before he even says one word to her, so what do I know? It was basically the same with Hirotaka, so I blame puberty. Things develop very quickly from here. Kim and Eric engage in a closer relationship, while Ron clearly suffers from it in two aspects. The one where he is not included in a part of Kim's life, and the one where he has to see that there is maybe another reason for why he feels so bad about it. While Kim's mood shifts from very depressed to overly joyous, Ron gets more and more angry about the fact that everything he likes and sees as important in his life gets taken away from him. All the while, Drakken finally gets a hold of Kim's dad and kidnaps him to get what he wants, the Hephaestus Project. The project about Cybertronic technology. Naturally, Kim then takes Ron on the mission to rescue him, not really knowing what happened, because James suffers from the after effects, and thus he cannot actually remember anything that happened. Shigo still has not found out what Drakken is up to, which is a good sign for him as he considers her enough proof that Kim will not assume anything then either. He basks in his supposed triumph while continuing his new reign over Bueno Nacho. All of this was just a brief hiccup in Kim's current situation though, as Eric becomes a very present part in Kim's life, so much that Kim even has a talk with Ron about his worries, but in the state in which he is, it is to no avail. Ultimately, Kim gets what she wants. Eric declares himself impressed by her world-saving side and wants her to go to prom with him. With this, she has the two things she was out for. Somebody that would not run away from her, and somebody that she could go out with without becoming the laughingstock of Middleton High. Ron does not know what to do. Trying out his dad's suit for prom, he still wrestles with his own feelings for Kim, clearly seeing how there is more to it than their friendship, but he has trouble figuring out how to approach her. It does not come to that. At least not for now, as Eric picks up a very happy Kim who is absolutely killing it in her new dress. The only one in the room who is feeling some cognitive dissonance is Anne, who is happy for Kim but feels sorry for Ron. The two then hit the road to join the others. Not Ron though. He seems to have given up on the chance of even going there and drags himself to Bueno Nacho. Ignoring Ned's desperate attempts of telling him something is wrong, and even Rufus's, he still has had enough when the next chance of the fast food chain is the last straw to break the camel's back. This leads to him calling in for a complaint, and to his surprise, or to be more clear, to his shock, having Drakken on the other end. This concludes the second episode. Ron has no time to process who just picked up the phone. He gets interrupted by the henchman that is in charge of his local Bueno Nacho and is chased away by the Diablos, who are more than mere toys. He reaches Middleton High Gym, but nobody believes him, except for his best friend. His whole paranoid assumption laid out, Kim finds it plausible enough to contact Wade despite Eric's attempt of interfering. And as it turns out, his assumptions about Drakken's plan to start conquering the world using the Bueno Nacho are right on. For more info, Kim asks her dad about the technology behind the Diablos, only to find out it is the project he had previously worked on. He tries to put their minds at ease about the danger as the Diablos would take a signal, but jinxes it as Shigo caught wind of Kim knowing something, which ultimately led to Drakken to prematurely start his attack by turning on the signal in Middleton. The Diablos turn into large war machines, destroying the Possible's house, and after tuning Ron's chopper, Team Possible gets to the Bueno Nacho, luring one of the Diablos with him, which destroys the sign that transmits the signal. Drakken then calls in to congratulate Kim. Impressed by her success, he shows Eric was kidnapped, and gives her the ultimatum of surrendering or risking Eric's safety. Kim is not in the mood for this though. She tries on a new battlesuit designed by Wade and gets to the Bueno Nacho headquarters together with Ron. Next to some knockout gas, she also got an EM jammer that is supposed to kill the signal that controls all Diablos. The sumo ninja they already dealt with in Japan gets made quick work of with a gas, but Shigo chimes in for the first round against Kim's suit. After some back and forth, Kim ultimately gets provoked and knocks Shigo down. But when Eric appears and Kim falls in his arms, the big revelation comes. He's one of Drakken's synthedrones. He electrocutes Kim, making her lose consciousness, while Ron fails to come for the rescue as Shigo clotheslines him and they both get tied up. When they wake up, Ron sees a totally hopeless Kim who admits defeat, seeing how Drakken tricked her and how she fell for his synthedrone. Her best friend gives her a pep talk then about how she has to get back in the saddle and how other boys are better for her. Like boys in this room. Their sweet moment, however, gets interrupted as Rufus shows up and frees them. Drakken then starts the signal for the Diablos that start growing globally and force humanity into submission. He can only bathe in his triumph for a very short moment though, as a very pissed Kim stands in front of him and serves him the punch that he so very much deserved after 3 seasons. On their way to the roof, Kim and Ron then show Eric what they think of him by stepping on his face or even kicking his head. Shigo swats the jammer out of Kim's hand and their final battle starts in a thunderstorm, below an army of Diablos while Ron has to face Eric. Ron throws the jammer back to Kim, who then fires it off, but it was in vain. Eric caught the projectile, leading to some relief for Drakken. Once again, the scientist thinks he has won, and once again, his moment of triumph only lasts for mere seconds. It is neither Kim nor Ron who saved the day then. Rufus snuck into Eric's suit and, pissed off by a comment Eric made about naked mole rats, he bites him in the foot, leading for the synthetic fluid to leak out, causing Eric to melt and the projectile to hit the signal tower. The Diablos get shut down. Drakken once again has failed, and Shigo gets one decisive kick that leads to her crashing into the signal tower, which then collapses. And the last thing we see on the rooftop is one kick-ass shot of Kim standing at the edge, smiling in the thunderstorm. Drakken and Shigo get arrested, with him not accepting his defeat, as usual. Then, the time has come. Kim takes Ron's hand. They appear at the gym together, dressed up. And only Bonnie laughs. The rest of them cheers. with Kim and Ron finally being there on a date for prom. And as the ending song plays, for the first time without any sort of emotional chip and completely aware of what they want, they kiss. And thus, the movie ends. Drakken is the main villain of this movie, and despite some way too fond of Shigo fans, he always was the main villain of the show. He was the only logical choice for it, and therefore I am glad they went for it. That being said, considering Season 4 obviously does not have him as the big bad in the finale, it is one of the many reasons actually, why I think this movie is way stronger, as it relies more on what worked for the show and builds on those things. Then again, Drakken redeems himself in Season 4, so there is a neat little spin to that, and Graduation just has its very own strengths. Still, picking Drakken as the big bad for the supposed finale and showing something that was long overdue was what made this movie special. Drakken, despite being used for laughs all the time, is nowhere close to being an idiot, and in this movie they finally showed it. Seeing how he used Kim's father and a robot army, I think it would have been absolutely perfect for the story to come full circle if he tried to take over the world with a now perfected BB army, but that would have required a completely different approach. Maybe it could have worked if the Diablos once transformed looked like a new fierce BB, but obviously they wanted to go for a more classic style of a destructive robot/war machine. Also, the plot could have gotten a bit more repetitive, as the BBs were used before, twice actually, and since Drakken became a villain because of that and he wanted to get acknowledged for perfecting them, I would have loved for them to be incorporated. Nonetheless, Drakken is an absolute genius in this movie. He works with what seems to be a failed mission for him and uses a single draft of a new toy's blueprint for what is going to sell well. Meanwhile, he has his own projects running, with one of them being psychologically analyzing teenagers. This is not the first time though. He did that in A Stitch in Time as well, and it shows how fierce he can be if he truly puts his cognitive resources to good use. Well, quote unquote good use. It is even more great from a storytelling perspective, as the entirety of the show was about the dichotomy of Kim's two lives, and now he actually invades those two parts of her life for his evil plans. And here again, it is not dissimilar to what Shigo does as Miss Ogus in A Stitch in Time. While she had Kim and Ron separated, Drakken also manipulates Kim's life to follow a direction where she for once would let her guard down and could not really interfere in his plans. This even happened in Crush with Josh Mankey, where she already ignored her communicator for a moment of her normal and nice life. And this also happens so much to the extent that, as a direct result, Ron also gets sidelined, but not so much that he cannot get behind what is happening, and just like in so many other episodes where either Ron, Rufus, Wade, or even other characters are involved, it is only thanks to him that the main villain, this time Drakken, again can be stopped. So often Kim would have died, or some other garbage would have happened, would have nobody else been there, and Ron, and by extension Rufus, are the ones to get behind what is up. Sure, in his case, it is by pure fluke oftentimes, as he gets Drakken on the phone by surprise, but that is just what makes his character. Much of Ron is simply dumb luck that works in his favor. And Drakken very obviously did not calculate Ron as relevant enough for his plan, as with all the analysis that he did, he still wasn't able to prevent him from finding out and even convincing Kim that something was up. So while Drakken definitely has his own style of taking Kim out of the equation, unlike Shigo, he still sort of underestimated how much the world needed both of them. Even though Shigo technically did not win because of the two being separated, but this is something I will talk about in a specific A Stitch in Time review. Then again, even in A Stitch in Time, they won because of Ron, so Shigo did not think about it that much, and maybe Drakken and her are not that far apart in terms of classic villain overconfidence. As far as the plot for this movie goes, however, Drakken is 100% the danger to look out for. And it is not just him giggling about a sketch or analyzing a teenager's life. He has a complicated multi-step plan where every piece is interwoven. One of the probably most impressive things about this movie is that they hand-wave it away that Drakken nonchalantly becomes the head of Bueno Nacho. Nothing about how he did it, he just did it. The only thing that he mentions is that he aggressively took it over, and that was it. This might leave a bit to be desired, but since this is not what the movie is actually primarily about, it adds some comedic effect to it, and shows how good he is, if he can do that so easily. I might point out that this event shows, like many villains who, to get what they want, and therefore start a new business, Drakken here could also have just called it a day and become a successful businessman. But his passion gets the better of him. It has sort of the same comedic effect as when he and Shigo sold ice cream, or whenever Team Rocket from Pokemon sell some stuff in stadiums, or have a completely different business. They all could be so successful with ease, but the writers just conjure those things up as a means to the end, unintentionally creating something hilarious about the situation where the villains always show they have talent and easy success, but rather disregard that for the next failure. And when it comes to the ice cream truck that Drakken had, they even were aware of that fact, considering Drakken was surprised about how much profit he gained. Ron also in the movie makes for a funny scene mentioning how Drakken has no idea how to run a fast food chain, but nothing in the movie actually showed that beyond his own dissatisfaction. Another big thing they did with Drakken was that they left out his usual henchmen for the movie and took the chance to once again go for synthetic beings. A simple short fight scene with Shigo was enough foreshadowing, with her stating how they got better by now. And with that, the movie laid out another breadcrumb of what the mad scientist worked on for his most promising of all plans. Still, despite establishing him as a bigger threat this time, they did not leave out the usual funny scenes like some occasional tease from Shigo or him having a confrontation with Big Daddy Brotherson. This shows that even if they wanted to give him his moment of glory, they also did not want to take away the recognition value. All in all, what they did with the mission side plot of the movie, it is nothing outstanding, nothing that was never seen before, not even in the cartoon itself. But it is a simple concept, and it goes for the question of, but what if we gave this more time? In the end, we all know only rarely ever is a story brave enough to let a character lose for longer than 10 seconds, and if it is not well put together, anything unexpected often can come so out of left field and does not give anything in exchange for nothing, going the safe route, that it just leaves a bitter taste. This movie did none of that. It is a movie about a kids show. It was obvious that the heroes would win, because that is what usually is being done. Even in the other movie, we do not get a long arc about how everyone has to suffer under Shigo. It is fast-forwarded and solved within minutes. Most of the time, the only thing that people are waiting for is how an expected conclusion is reached, and how conflicts that are obviously supposed to be resolved are actually resolved then. And this is where the movie does differ from the usual Drakken thing. We get the same beloved and trademark villain of the show, but since there is room to breathe for the plot, we see him actually putting effort behind all of that, while parallelly watching Kim not having a clue about anything. While children might not necessarily watch the movie in an over-analytic manner, and therefore not think anything about Eric, it is also very much possible that the mere appearance of him sets up red flags already. He comes up when Kim is looking for a boy. Kim and Ron's relationship stumbles, and all the while Drakken is plotting something we only got vague details for. I don't think I personally thought too much of Eric when I originally watched the movie, as I was just absorbed in watching everything unfold, but seeing him telegraphed as evil is pretty easy. Naturally, that does not really make the plot bad. It still speaks for Drakken that he so well knew what would work for the situation. It is just one of the stories where you can go back and notice, so this is what was said and shown there already. All in all, for his supposed last plan of that grandeur, Drakken fulfilled his role well. And seeing how he even got revenge of sorts on Kim's dad, there was some multi-layered sense of fulfillment in showing the family of the Possibles who is boss, even if it classically had to end in his loss. But that is not to downplay what he did, because, as said, this is basically an extended version of their ordinary adventure, and in many of them Drakken or others would have won had they only faced Kim, and not the rest of Team Possible as well. And if anyone is fitting to get presented a cinematic defeat by Team Possible after performing so incredibly well and hilariously at the same time, then it is our Drew Lipsky. With the thought of bringing Kim and Ron together, there really is no better plot thread than bringing in another person that is in for the romantic part. You could always go for some save the beloved one scenario without bringing in another love interest, and then make the characters realize what is going on. But let's be honest, that does not make for enough drama, and it is not enough to be in spirit of the show, which has traditional daily problems on the table to which dating belongs, and maybe even some portion of jealousy or another form of conflict that makes you reconsider your relationship. Saving someone from a mad scientist also does the job, but is more a thing for the other side of Kim's life, so that alone would not suffice. Instead, they crafted something that worked for both sides. Now this begs the question about how realistic it is that Kim falls for Eric, and if Eric even was a good choice. They did a good job of explaining that Drakken now properly thought about what bugs Kim as a teenager. Still, bringing in a completely new character feels a bit cheap. Drakken wanted a hand-molded guy who's exactly what Kim was looking for. Handsome, reputable, charming, and all the other fancy adjectives. But not only should he have been actually suspicious to Kim and the audience by simply being the way he was, being new and appearing in the second third of the movie, he is too random of a character for the weight that he is supposed to have. Kim not getting behind that is understandable to an extent. She's not part of the audience, so she has no meta view on that. And in-universe, she's emotionally in a low, which then suddenly gets shifted to the extreme opposite, when she seemingly gets what she wants. She even remarks in front of her parents how he seems perfect. She's intelligent enough to potentially understand what a trap it is, but at the same time she's also just a teenager, and blinded by having found a seemingly ideal person. So the choice of bringing in Eric does something for the plot, even if he's not a recurring character. Nevertheless, apart from being the perfect guy who is nice to everyone and even seemed like a nice guy in front of Ron, and compassionate enough in front of Kim to ask if Ron is okay with all that, bringing in a sense of continuity could have done the movie a big favor. Josh Mankey was not in many episodes, but he was the one character of interest that actually was interesting for Kim. They never truly resolved what happened besides having Kim say that they grew apart, which really means nothing as it does not say if they properly dated and broke up, or just lost interest in each other after the first date. It was just an added-in attempt in emotion sickness of swiftly explaining something they never picked up again, but that did not actually bring any answers. That is something that I will tackle in a continuity video, however. Now, if they brought in a guy like Josh Mankey, they would have had the issue that people who are not familiar with the continuity had no idea who he was. But on the other hand, that should not be the reason not to do it. There was history, and they could have written an actual story around it with Kim and Josh addressing how they never tried being a real couple. In Emotion Sickness, he dated Tara, and in So the Drama, Tara suddenly dated someone else. That could also have been used to bring him back and make him make another move on Kim. As they were already fond of each other, it would solve Kim's issue she brings up in the movie about guys that are intimidated by what she does. And Josh was a regular part of Middleton High, as well as the kind of guy who girls wanted to be with, and with many of them getting rejected by him. So there would be no necessity in bringing in a new person that people would be fond of, as he already existed. Now, one question here is if it would be smart to do that, as, just with my BB idea, there would be continuity but not full-on originality. It really is a case of weighing the good against the bad, and I think it would have been worth it. Even Ron would have been an interesting person for the conflict, because he, just as he shows in the Josh Mankey episodes, is not fond of him, but he still supports Kim, something that he also addresses in the movie. This time the conflict could be different though, as the only reason he's not fond of him is the same as with Eric, his own feelings for Kim. As can be seen here, it would not have cost much of a change in the script to swap out Eric for Josh. It would have tied some threads together and been believable given what Kim had to go through. And I do not think it would have taken an actual perfect guy for the plot to work. Now, the bigger question is how Josh or anybody else would be incorporated with the other conflict, as Eric was a tool for Drakken. If we wanted to go for real cliches, we could bring back something like mind control. But I think that does not do the Kim and Josh relationship justice, and they should have solved their conflict on screen while being fully aware of themselves. The question here is if Drakken should be involved in this at all. Would there be any manipulation necessary at all? Does it even need to have to do with the Drakken conflict? If yes, it would still be easy. Drakken observes Kim all the time. There is no reason for him not to see when she has dating issues and just use that to his advantage. It is exactly what he did in the movie, just differently, and in case of the movie, he actually brought the character of Eric to the table. Here he could see Josh appear at the beginning of the movie, and then judging by what he sees Kim going through currently, start working around that. It would not lead to a guy electrocuting Kim, like Eric does for her to lose consciousness, but seeing how Kim was very fond of Josh, even in Crush, she could easily lose a bit of her focus about the missions. Now, all that is merely hypothetical, obviously, but considering this section is about how well Eric did fit into the story, an alternative take is something that I wanted to give. Eric is okay in general, as he just serves as a multi-layered tool in the story, for one as a trap, and also to make Kim and Ron awake. But I see no reason why for the latter, a known character that was never fully utilized could not have been used with a villain then taking advantage of that. Generally, Eric is still one of those guys that fit very much in the corner that Kim and many other girls were interested in throughout the show. But seeing how Kim likes Ron, she does not just have one type. So it could have been interesting to see somebody who she can show up with, but maybe is completely different from the perfect high school boy persona. Then again, Ron seemed to be the only oddball she liked in the show, so maybe he is just that special to her, which makes it even cuter. What I think in terms of how they should have pulled it off, and for that it does not matter if a known character or a new character was introduced, is that maybe they should have written the scene of Kim coming to the conclusion that Ron is the right guy in a different way. The way it is presented in the movie, Kim comes to that conclusion once she finds out Eric is just a synthedrone, and that she was fooled. While I believe that her feelings for Ron are genuine, this scene always has some sort of taste of having picked Ron because the other option was off the table. That is very similar to an earlier scene in the movie where she is fine with going to prom with Ron until Eric appears and it then no longer matters. It just leaves a bit of her sour taste behind. Therefore, having a known character, or even Eric, but way before the revelation that he's a synthedrone, and writing a scene in which Kim decides that it is Ron when the other party is still a supposed option, might have made for a better emotional impact. For Eric, there still would be the conclusion that it obviously would not have worked anyway, but
but in this scenario she already would have chosen Ron over whichever other character.
It was still a cute scene in the end, with both of them tied up and Kim realizing what's going on,
but I think a scene that does not leave any question behind about whether she would have chosen someone else if that person was still an option would be nicer for such a story.
This brings me right to the next topic, however. Since I plan to release super deep dives for Kim and Ron's personalities, the narrative consistency and their believability as a couple respectively, these themes will not be covered here as much. Still, considering this is the ultimate goal of what the story of So the Drama is about, a good minute should still be spent on it. While the two main characters becoming a couple was always in the minds of the creators, they sure took their sweet time. So much to the extent that many people felt quite underwhelmed by the ultimate execution of Kim and Ron getting together. Both the loose consistency of the show as well as the fact that most of the episodes that focused around dating were mostly about a third party instead are to be blamed for that. This, while being a design choice that has its shortcomings in terms of narration, has system. For the kind of show that KP was supposed to be, it had to be done that way to retain its episodic nature. Many shows of the same kind sacrifice a properly crafted string of events and story with full-blown consistency for the sake of a show that is more lighthearted and allows for the viewer to tune in at whichever time. And only occasionally references or truly important bits are being brought back. The show relied a bit more on that the further it went, but it never fully committed to it. But that is a story for the actual consistency video about the show. Now, would the creators have brought Kim and Ron actually on the table, it would have completely shifted the tone of the show and changed it from there on. The moment it is truly brought up, and not just as a slight tease, its own weight does not allow for it to be ignored and has to either be implemented as a real element of the show, or it loses its impact. Since Kim and Ron are the only characters of a show that really are in the spotlight, with Drakken and Shigo being a close but not that close second, it would not have been possible to actually distract from it for long enough, other than shows with multiple main characters and arcs that can do much better. In that regard, Kim and Ron becoming an item, but never with that much of the cliched kind of attention and hints that one is normally used to, is understandable. It does not mean there could not have been more, as a few more moments certainly would not have done any harm, but it still was executed really well in terms of what the show was always like, and how the characters were always portrayed individually and together. It is very easy to make an argument about how Ron might not have been a real choice for Kim, and how her thoughts in the movie might even have been kinda awful. And looked at in isolation, it certainly is something where Ron can be felt sorry for even more than his own scenes in the movie try to achieve. But as said, that is only looking at it in isolation. Just like you could come to the same conclusion for the entirety of the show if you choose to ignore the remaining 95% of the narrative and what it is all about. To dive a bit into the personality part and how well they mesh together for this video, and as said, for those, also extended, actually dedicated videos will come out. Kim in this movie seems really inconsiderate. Not necessarily directly in front of Ron himself, but whenever she talks to somebody else about her current dilemma. Other than simply wanting to pull up with a normal date for once, facing the possibility that she is getting ridiculed by her peers for being the only girl in the cheerleading squad that either has no date or goes with Ron, she gets seriously depressed, especially as she does not know how to get anybody else to be actually interested in her and not be intimidated. The latter one is a very arbitrary part of the script that never seemed to be an actual issue in the show, as the only thing that ever came close to that was with Brick Flag thinking of her as too extreme in her commitment as he misunderstood what happened. Other than that, nothing was ever really done for that to be believable,
So this is a fact that has to be accepted here, even though it is not really with a portrayal of her social interactions in the show, and here again, a better established, consistent narrative would have really helped. Nevertheless, accepting that, as it is stated in the movie by herself, we are meant to feel for her for never really having a chance and her struggles of simply not following the expectations of others. Meanwhile, Ron at first is not so much in the focus of being felt sorry for, because Eric does not appear until the second third of the movie. The implications of Kim not really seeing Ron as a guy, but just as a good friend and actually being down because she might end up with going to prom with him and getting ridiculed for it, might paint her in an even unlikable light. It gives off the impression that her reputation means way more to her than Ron does. And not only that, but accepting that showing up with him will not make for a memorable moment, so for a statement, shows that she even agrees with Bonnie about how Ron is nothing special. And that is exactly why the entirety of the show is actually important. What I just said seems mean, and makes for a questionable image of their relationship. But the same happens when I take other moments of Kim's personal lowlights of the show. And once again, the same happens when I take Ron's moments, in which he basically becomes an entirely different person the moment he gets attention. You cannot just take a moment and call it a day. But that is why there will be other videos for it, as these require way more attention. Kim's depiction here is both inconsistent as well as consistent. She has Ron's back during the entire show, and despite of him being the butt of each joke all the time, very clearly does not care about his own oddities and how it might affect others seeing her when having him around. They have their own little moments when even she feels embarrassed and even agrees with Bonnie about things like the Mad Dog idea, but eventually they always find a way back together because of how close they are. Meanwhile, and especially because of people like Bonnie, as Bonnie in particular is a trope of a character, Kim constantly had to fight her own fights about public perception, peer pressure, and other social issues throughout the show. She gets faced with what people expect her to be like. She gets embarrassed, but in the end she is always even very similar to Ron in sticking to her own thing, at least most of the time, whenever an episode is not downplaying a resolution for a joke. But in any way, this is Kim's arc. She is a top-grade student, a cheerleader, and even a publicly celebrated hero. Other than Ron, who has to struggle with finding his way in life despite being a cliché nerd, she has to face the issue of keeping her reputation. And with this, the way the movie builds up Kim's inner conflict is absolutely in line with what was pre-established. It is not necessarily well handled in terms of her thoughts about Ron, and thus comes off as surprisingly mean, but in context of Kim's personal struggles, it is still very consistent. So, how believable is the actual outcome of the movie now? First of all, it is supposed to be a cute, classic Disney story with a happy end of the two prime characters getting together. That is not always done in the most well thought out way, but sufficient and first and foremost fitting for the younger audience, and for how the show portrayed things in general. I'm not necessarily a fan of the more subtle approach, or at least not that subtle, but as many fans over the course of the years pointed out, the things were there. And the strongest thing about Kim and Ron is the fact that them knowing each other for so long and already having this love for each other, even if it was not lived out romantically before, serves as a solid foundation. This makes it way easier to see how they were meant for each other, as the cartoon simply was about them, and their dynamic in any way was one of the hooks of it. Them seeing what they have in each other and then finally being ready for the next step is not actually unnatural, but works with what was laid out. Would the show have been made differently, maybe it would have worked differently as well, and as said before, I would have liked at least a bit more than just the few teases that we got, so it is fair to say that it might have been a bit underwhelming, because it was not established in the most classic and expected strong way, but the way it was handled, it is not really fair to say that it was not believable. Also, we have to take into consideration that Ron, just like in Emotion Sickness and other little moments in the show, also in the movie makes it clear that he has seen more in her. And while Kim responds to her problematic situation in regards to Ron not being her dating of prom option because of status, which, as I've already said, certainly can be seen as mean, there is one thing about that nobody should miss out on. Kim only specifically talks about exactly that, for reputation reasons, and because she does not know how to keep guys interested. She never once, not even when her mother talks with her about it, expresses disinterest in Ron or how he is not her type. She clearly tolerates his personality, as 3 seasons proved up to that point, and really the only moment that sort of is counterproductive for the believability of that is that in the episode in which Zeta was introduced, Kim finds the thought of her getting mistaken as a couple with Ron not realistic. But even that was not because there was no foundation. It simply was because they both had to have the awakening of what they actually had in each other. This is why the show is very unconventional in how they handled such a topic. Not only was it not thematically brought up that often, it also was done much different than the traditional find each other and either fall in love or not way. Instead, the showrunners went with a childhood friends out of the sandbox idea, where they had to go through many hardships and saving each other multiple times from getting almost killed way that culminated in their private life and search for happiness, showing them the answer was there all the time, and combine it with what they did throughout the show. Learn not to care so much about what others did and said. And with that, this character arc, especially Kim's, who had to deal with that so often, is complete. And for that, this goal of the movie to bring Kim and Ron together was done really well. Would I have done it differently? Sure. But that does not take out the magic of the moment this movie gave me. But again, I have more videos in store, and my good minute about this is over. Ironically, as much as the show relies on its episodic little adventures, so the drama picks up a lot of narrative pace and relies on what came before. So as a movie that somebody who does know nothing about the show can watch, this might not work that well. It is not a complete waste of time, as they still crafted a traditional save the world scenario with a happy ending on top of it, but the entire way it was built up, it just is very obviously expected to be a movie for those who at least know the show well enough. And in that regard, as a movie for a Kim Possible fan who wants to see another big-scale conflict paired with daily drama that has one grand climax where both sides of Kim's life seamlessly flow into each other, this is one fantastic movie. Considering this was the original show finale, even if we hadn't gotten a 4th season, the quality of this movie, obvious effort that went into the making of it, even with a new opening rendition and the sense of finality and vibe of now it's getting serious, this was done successfully. Just like KP got better in terms of artwork with time and had some wonderfully animated scenes, this movie also very much is far up there. Most of it looks super clean and crisp, except for some short moments where the art was not quite on par with the rest. I also absolutely love what they did with light and shadow in this movie. Especially the scene with Kim and Eric under the streetlights is a visually very pleasing one. In terms of the story, I said most of it already. I think Kim and Ron's personal issues needed most of the movie, as it is what it's actually about, of course, so it should have had that time. But I still think that the conflicts between Kim and Drakken are almost a bit too short sometimes. Naturally, the movie is about how Kim does not get behind his plan, but some scenes are just too quickly concluded, and for a movie version they could have done more in that regard. The finale, for example, has Kim and Ron in the headquarters for a while, but after Ron's confession, the actual resolution was very abrupt. There was not much of a fight with Eric. The last round against Chigo almost feels like it was not actually cared about, because the fight in the main hall is more the true final fight between them, and Drakken did not for a moment consider to at least command a few of the thousands of Diablos that are flying around to attack Kim and Ron. There definitely could have been a bit more to create a more tense situation where it would have been even harder and even more urgent to kill the signal.
The final song, Could It Be, very fitting to have been sung by Christy, so Kim Possible herself, is very much on the level of other Disney love songs, accompanying the final cute scene of the movie with Kim and Ron finally becoming a couple and perfectly concluding the movie.
I always consider So the Drama the best Kim Possible product, and there is a reason for that. Kim Possible was always a show about its characters, the human relationships, but of course also some sense of excitement and a good laugh. But what it always had was heart, and all of that was ramped up to the max for this movie, just as all their heart was put into this project. It gives off definitive, okay guys, this is it, but we make it count vibes. And while I think Season 4 is a fantastic addition to the show, I would have been very happy about this being the series finale. Very often we get finales that are an absolute letdown, but this one would have been not just a good, but a fantastic finale. I would certainly not have been mad about a few narrative tweaks or half an hour more, but that is more because of me being so invested in this show. For the product that it is to complement the show, it is just an overall really good movie. I for a few weeks thought I had lost my DVD and was very happy when I found it again just recently, and then I immediately rewatched the movie.
That should be enough of a statement about what I think about the movie's rewatchability and how much I like it.